So imagine you've been playing a game for a few years and have been stuck at the same rank for the majority of your game time. That is when good players will take accountability for their shortcomings, identify what they're doing wrong, and improve upon their weaknesses to climb to higher ranks. But no one wants to do that. It's so hard to be self aware. So here is my tier list of best excuses for being low elo. I want to preface this list by saying how everything that is not an S tier is not a valid excuse, with A tier excuses only being a little bit better than F tier excuses. Oh, and this list is ordered, so let's begin with F tier. I'm only smurfing nowadays, starting off with probably the worst excuse I've ever heard. For those of you unfamiliar, smurfing is the act of creating a new account with the intention to play at lower skill levels. There are a lot of reasons for smurfing. The main one is to play with lower ranked friends. But there are people who smurf just to get back at other people who smurfed in their games, or to simply get easier games to win. This is a great excuse to feel better for not improving at the cost of losing the respect of literally everyone around you. You do not get to feel better about not improving because you deliberately choose to not play at the level that does not allow you to improve. Yeah, this goes in F tier. My teammates suck and I'm just unlucky. This is interchangeable with the previous one. It is by far the most annoying excuse to hear on the list, and one of the more common ones, unfortunately. How many times have you been flamed by someone and you remind them that they are the same skill level as you, and they reply, yeah, it's because of people like you. There are a million people who have talked about this already, so I will be concise. If all people in your elo suck and you're better than all of them, then you should win most of the time, since your team will have one less player who sucks on it. I will move on because I actually hate talking about this. F tier. I play for fun and don't like tryharding to win. We're slowly stepping into excuses I don't get mad just reading. This is yet another very common one. Like, I wasn't trying and I let you win are common variations of this excuse. This is very effective because we all understand why tryharding is not fun. When we try our best at anything and do not succeed, our ego is shattered. Therefore, some people avoid this by not putting their pride on the line and quote-unquote play for fun. This is basically like selecting the worst character in the game to put the burden of winning on your opponent, making it a lose-lose situation for them. If they win, they get called a tryhard for picking a good meta character and not playing for fun. And if they lose, they get humiliated because they lost to a bad character. You do not get a prize for not participating in a contest. The same way you do not get to alleviate blame by protecting your ego and not risking anything on the line by picking something bad. F tier. I get tilted too easily and have a bad mental. I will admit to having used this one a few times, which is why I can say it is truly a terrible excuse. For some reason, a lot of people see having a weak mental as a perfectly valid reason to suck. I can't tell you why it's such an acceptable weakness to have, but I will argue why it is not. Being unshakable after a loss is something you can undeniably control, and being quick to anger in non-gaming situations is seen as a terrible thing to be, and people literally go to therapists to fix it. Just because we add the context of a game does not take accountability away from you. Good excuses need to first and foremost take accountability away. You are responsible for what you let get to your head. You do not get to feel better for sucking at something just because you suck at something else. This goes in F tier. I don't have time to play seriously. On paper, it's a great excuse. After all, it's not your fault that you don't have time, which takes accountability away from you. And it's very believable since we have all been on a time crunch. But that's exactly why this excuse sucks. Everyone has to balance their time playing games with their real life stuff. Yeah, you probably would be at a higher rank if you played all day every day, but since literally almost anyone can make that excuse, it's going in the F tier like all the others. Good excuses are those that only you can make. It's still better than the previous excuse since this one actually blames something valid. Just too bad that it's something that we all have to go through. F tier. Genetics don't allow me to be good at games. Excuses in C tier are still terrible excuses, but they do not have something that is glaringly wrong about them. This is an absolutely amazing excuse for a lot of traditional sports. If you are not tall, you are most likely not making it to the NBA. If you are not fast, you are probably not going to be a wide receiver, etc. I will say, if you are at Apex Elos, this is very valid and should be an S tier. When you are nearing the top, getting any small advantage is enough to win, and genetics is definitely an advantage you have no control over. But let me remind you, this is a list of excuses for being low elo. You are not yet good enough to be blaming genetics when you hang a piece every 2 moves. C tier. I'm too lazy to study the game. I mostly hear this one being made about chess. Again, it's one I have made myself. Chess has a reputation for being very annoying to improve at, since a lot of players associate getting better at chess with memorizing more and more openings. I only ever see new players make these types of excuses. I remember myself thinking that mastering a certain build in StarCraft would get me to Diamond, only to very quickly realize how foolish that idea was. I also believed learning openings was the key of getting out of 1200, and I can promise you that learning the Relopez did not get me anywhere. No game is as simple as just taking a few days to study and suddenly you are high elo. Competitive games are not a test that you take to pass a class. C tier. My peripherals and internet suck. Ah yes, the legendary I'm lagging. Nothing even comes close to this in terms of how iconic this excuse is. I'm gonna combine peripherals with internet since I believe they are two sides of the same coin. Sure, if you play at 10 FPS with a $5 mouse and a broken membrane keyboard, you will be at a major disadvantage. But most people who blame their peripherals have very normal and usable specs. I'm not going to argue that better peripherals do not make a difference, because at the Apex level they certainly do. But if you are silver and complain about your mousepad grain, you better be joking. The internet is a similar thing. Sure, there are games that you lose due to lag, but we have all been there, and blaming your shortcomings on lag...
Besides, like, when I start lagging, Graves, it's not even real. Like, all my accounts, when I DK'd...
He said he was lagging.
That is a low no other excuse can achieve. Yeah, that goes in C tier. I'm too old and can't keep up with the new kids. The only excuse I have in B tier. I have a video talking about age and esports already, but this excuse is for those who think their age is the only reason they are bad. I'm putting this excuse in B since I do believe it becomes more valid the older you get. Like, if you're in your 60s and can barely move your fingers due to arthritis, that is a very valid reason as to why you're not that good at the games you play, and this excuse would easily be S tier. But if you're like 24 and you think the only reason you're not at the top is because you're not 18, you absolutely deserve to get clowned, and this excuse would be an F tier excuse. So I'm gonna put it in the middle and say it is a B tier excuse. I play worse because it's winter. I know probably none of you have ever heard this one, and this really only applies to countries that actually get very cold during the winter, but I have heard this being given to me as a genuine excuse as to why they were slumping. I obviously scoffed at this idea, but then I gave it a bit more thought. It's actually a pretty good excuse. It takes accountability away from you while being believable and only applying to you. Cold hands definitely makes people perform worse, and not everyone can afford heating in their room. And I will extend this excuse for summer as well, because I personally don't have AC in my room and it can go up to 33 degrees Celsius sometimes, which basically makes it impossible to focus. This is still a bad excuse because most people will call you a clown, but I personally think it's a pretty funny one. A tier. The meta does not favor me. In my opinion, this is the best of the bad excuses. It takes accountability away from you by blaming the game developers, which is something we love to do. And it is believable because you can back it up with statistics. And this is amazing because most people will be playing a different strategy than you and be affected by the meta differently. But this excuse has flaws because most of the most effective tactic available change very often. If you blame the meta for underperforming, then you better perform when the meta does favor you, which we already know isn't happening if you are hard stuck for months. And for games that don't change very often, like chess, if you only play the Bong Cloud, you are basically choosing to nerf yourself and are claiming that you are not trying, which is an excuse that we already discussed. A tier. My opponent played better than me. Yep, that's the best and only valid excuse, and it's one that's barely an excuse at all, because no one is willing to make this. It doesn't take any accountability away from you. This video is basically saying there are no valid excuses. You are at fault for your own shortcomings, and you cannot blame anyone for you being low elo. Not me though. My team always sucks and my mouse has too much traction.